welcome in our friend Chris Doering with the SEC Network and former Gator All-American wide receiver under Spurrier during the heyday of the 90s. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. How you doing, buddy?
Good morning, Bo. I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. This is interesting. Minus 10.5. The money's on Ole Miss. Florida is playing a lot better football. Who knows what happens if Mertz doesn't get knocked out against Tennessee or DJ against Georgia. Here's where I was impressed, CD, and you walk me through it. Billy Napier came up with a offensive game plan with Lagway this past week, and he didn't have one rushing attempt. And he is a dual threat mobile quarterback who's super talented and young. And yet they beat LSU and outscored them 14-3 in the fourth quarter. Had I told you that he would not have a rushing attempt, would you have told me that Florida would win the game last weekend?
No, I would not have. And I picked Florida to win the game a couple times on different shows last week, largely because I thought he would play and I thought he would have an impact with his ability to run against an LSU defense that really had struggled stopping the run in general, but specifically with mobile quarterbacks. So I thought, the interesting part was going to see how limited he was due to the hamstring injury. But I certainly believe the legs were going to have to be a part of Florida's offensive game plan in order to win that game. But I guess looking back, the legs were involved, and it wasn't in rushing attempts. It was eluding some of the LSU pressure in the pocket. I thought he did a really nice job of stepping up on the long throw to Elijah Badger. Multiple times had to kind of move to elude that pressure. So he did have to use a little of the mobility, but certainly not to the extent that I thought he was going to have to use it with the game plan that I expected against LSU's defense.
He is so talented. Chris Doering with the SEC Network, Lagway. The future is bright, but Ole Miss is loaded and talented. So, are you expecting a close game in Gainesville, CD?
Yeah, you know what? It's an interesting matchup here. You know, you mentioned the early start, noon local time, 11 a.m. for the body clocks of those that are coming over from Central Time, and you think about kind of where these two teams are. You know, I understand that Ole Miss has been banged up a little bit and probably coming off an emotional win against Georgia. Maybe needed to have a break, but at the same time, you have to believe that maybe keeping the momentum rolling after that big win would have been good for Ole Miss. Florida now feeling much more confident in what they're doing. They're looking at trying to get bowl eligible this week. I think 10 points seems like a lot to me, given the way that Florida's playing right now. But I do think the line of scrimmage matchup will be the most interesting dynamic in this game. That's where Florida's made the biggest improvement. But I think if you go back and look at the way Florida was dominated on the line of scrimmage against Miami and against Texas A&M back in September, it looked like Florida was really deficient on the offensive and defensive lines. Now it's actually become a strength. And you texted me the other day about how nasty Florida's defensive line is. Honestly, I don't know if they've changed what they're doing schematically some. I don't know, if the guys are feeling more confident in the schemes that they've been running. But certainly the pressure has been there. 7 sacks against an offensive line for LSU that had only allowed 6 for the entire season.
Wow.
They have 11 total tackles for loss. Really disruptive, not only rushing the passer, but in terms of disrupting the run game too. So that to me, I think is going to be the interesting matchup. The Ole Miss offensive line has been good pass blocking. They haven't necessarily been able to run the ball like we expected them to this year. But on the other side, can Florida's offensive line, which I think is much improved, particularly running the ball, can they block that front four for Ole Miss that had 5 sacks against Georgia 2 weeks ago?
No, I agree. Line of scrimmage, that's where Florida's got to man up and match up to take this thing into the fourth quarter in the swamp. But they are, 88, 94 for Florida on Saturday. And then even without, like you were talking about, without Lagway being a threat to run, the offensive line was able to move some people. I know this isn't a dominant LSU defense from maybe back in the day with Saban or whatnot, even some of those Miles teams, but they still got dudes. Were you surprised that they knew, a quarter and a half in, they knew Lagway wasn't going to run the ball? Were you surprised that the offensive line was able to open those holes for those two backs, young backs?
I really was. I was shocked by it. The offensive line. Well, I wasn't shocked to the point of like I figured with how bad LSU's run defense was in general that they would have a hard time. But what I was more shocked with was how many opportunities were there for the explosive pass plays. I think knowing that Lagway wasn't going to beat you with the legs, I figured that they would have tried to maybe bring a little bit more pressure. They had a hard time keeping up with Badger and DK and
Sure.
some of the other Florida receivers. So I would have thought trying to get home, even if it takes leaving your guys in one-on-one situations, they weren't necessarily doing a great job of covering anyway. So I would have probably expected to see a lot more pressure. But Florida's explosive offense, they only had, I think, 42 plays. I think it was like 92 plays to 42 plays. Florida had the ball for less than, or right at about 18 minutes in that ball game.
Unreal.
Yeah, efficient offense and average, I think it was close to 10 yards per play. It was pretty impressive to see what Florida was able to do with a quarterback that was as limited as DJ was.
Are you expecting him? What are you hearing? Are you expecting him to be able to move around more on Saturday?
I haven't heard any update on. He's been very coy with what his injury recovery's been since the Georgia game. Watching him get carted off, I thought he was done for the year.
No doubt.
To see him come back 2 weeks later, pretty amazing to think what that staff, trainers, and other medical folks over there has been able to do for his recovery.
All right, Ole Miss hasn't been able. One or two more. Florida's secondary. Trey Harris is back. They've got some other pieces. You mentioned Ole Miss hasn't been able to run the football like they wanted to this year, although Dart is dangerous as all get out when he starts rolling. How do you think Florida's secondary matches up against the Ole Miss wide receivers and tight end?
Yeah, it's going to be a tough challenge. The only thing that I can relate it to is probably the Texas game a couple weeks ago where, Florida was going up against that dangerous group of wide receivers. Did not fare very well. They've been, struggling a little bit with injuries in the back half of that defense as well. So it's going to be a tough task. But, I think, it comes down to the ability to affect Jackson Dart. If you can, force Ole Miss to be one-dimensional, it's a pretty good option with their passing game. But if you can, eliminate the run and try to get some pressure on Jackson Dart, I think that's your best case scenario. I don't see the secondary being able to hold up with it reminds me a lot of our Florida receivers back in the day. It was me, it was Riedel Anthony, it was Ike Hilliard, it was Jacquez Green, it was Travis McGriff. Our five were better than just about any other five you could roll out there defensively against us. And I think that's the case with Ole Miss in every game with as deep as not only the receivers are, but with Prescorn and Daquan Wright. It's an impressive group. So I do think that Florida's going to have a hard time covering, and I think that's why you're probably going to see Ron Roberts and Austin Armstrong dial up some pressures to try to find a way to affect Jackson Dart.
All right, last one. Tonight, who's the best team in the SEC today? Not a couple of weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. Who's the best team in the SEC on a neutral field today?
Oh, man, back in Columbia. Just a very, very different team now than what they were. But it's going to be fun down the stretch, man. I'm excited to see how these last 2 weeks play out. I know it's a different dynamic now, but I don't ever remember being this deep in the season and having zero idea.
No, I agree.
The conference in the championship game.
All right, my man. CD, Chris Doering with the SEC Network, former Gator great, joining us on the Out of Bounds show, brought to you by Stella Artois. Thank you, buddy. And guess what? Hey, if Diego Pavia goes into Baton Rouge, I know LSU's not good, but and they've still got dudes. But if Diego Pavia goes into Baton Rouge and if LSU's checked out and they win, Can you imagine how wild your Saturday night show is going to be, CD?
Oh, I mean, it's that's one of the things I worry about with LSU is what the capitulation factor is.
Yeah.
At least last week they had a chance to potentially still get to Atlanta, but with nothing really riding on the line and the chaos kind of around, Coach Kelly right now, what his future is. I mean, it's going to be a tough task with I think with Vandy, maybe more than any other team in the league, what you're going to get when you play those guys. They are well coached, they are disciplined, and they don't make many mistakes. So LSU's going to have their hands full.
Yeah, they're tough as hell. CD, thank you, buddy. Have a great week, okay?
Thank you. Appreciate you both. Take care, man.
Chris Doering with the SEC Network on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. You're listening to the Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. We'll have Handicapper to the Stars coming up next. Dave Bartu, brought to you by Pearl River Resort and Dancing Rabbit Golf Club.